Hi there everybody, Jen Serravallo here. Today is day 2 of 3 of going live talking about read aloud. And again, I'm drawing from tips and ideas in my new book, Teaching Reading Across the Day. This book covers a bunch of different lesson types, 9 in fact, different lesson types, all under the umbrella of principles of efficient, explicit, engaging instruction. And read aloud is just one of the chapters. But since it's such an important structure, we thought we would take 3 days and explore it a little bit with you. So today's topic is going to lean on yesterday's. Yesterday we talked about how long are read-alouds, how do they go, how do we engage kids with different prompts and different kind of engagement invitations like turning and talking and stopping and jotting. I shared a couple of texts and modeled how I would use strategies to plan different prompts throughout those texts. And today we're really going to be thinking together more about texts. How do we choose the text that we're going to use? I want to start off by saying I think there's going to be times when you're not choosing the text. Many people across the US, and I'm sure there's people joining from overseas as well, have a core curriculum that they're being asked to follow. And sometimes what's going to happen in that core curriculum is that there is going to be a text and a lesson with objectives clearly spelled out, and you're going to look at that text and you're going to think, this is a little harder than what my kids are going to be able to handle independently, let's say, if the core curriculum calls for it to be independent practice. And you might then decide to keep the text, keep the lesson objectives, but change the lesson structure. So in that case, you're not really choosing the text, you're choosing to use read aloud to help kids with that text, knowing that read aloud is a really nice supportive structure where we offer a lot of scaffolding and support to readers as they're practicing. Then there's going to be other times where you are choosing the text, and that's really what we're going to talk about today. How do you make good choices? What books are even going to set us up to have good lessons to begin with? What are some considerations? So I'm going to be drawing from today's Facebook Live is going to be drawing from just page 69, which is in the Read Aloud chapter. Every one of the lesson type chapters follows a predictable structure, and one structure or one repeated section in each of the chapters is a section on planning. And I unpack text considerations, which will be the first thing to think about with regards to planning. So the first thing we're going to think about is topic and content that the book covers. So you're probably aware that there's quite a bit of research that supports or shows how important background knowledge is to being able to handle new texts. And one recommendation that a lot of researchers have for us teachers is to make sure that the texts we're selecting align to the content that we're teaching, and or that we create conceptually coherent sets of texts so that across a series of lessons, it could be a series of read aloud lessons or a read aloud lesson and other types of lessons, but across a series of lessons, kids are encountering the same kinds of vocabulary, related concepts, so that all this information that they're learning connects in some way in their brain, right? Rather than like one day reading about whales, the next day reading about the plague in Europe, and then the next day reading about plastic in our oceans. We're going to instead say, how can we create text and across days or across time help build that knowledge and help strengthen that knowledge? So again, one thing you could do is, here's a new favorite text of mine. Anyone who's taken a workshop with me lately has probably seen me reference this one, Climate Change and How We'll Fix It. Really engaging nonfiction or informational text with lots of interesting page layouts and features, and it's really great for teaching, figuring out main idea and supporting information. There's a variety of different text structures across the text, which are really nice. And each section each spread really works as its own section. You don't have to read the entire book to be able to benefit from some of the big ideas in this text. So I love this text, and if I were going to read this to my students and we were studying changes to our climate and the importance of taking action to do something about it, I might also pair it with something like this, Ducks Overboard, a true story of plastic in our oceans. In fact, there's like 2 whole spreads in here about plastic. So it's not that it's exactly the same topic exactly, it's more that there are conceptual relationships between these, and one book helps kids to develop a deepened understanding over time. Or it could be also that we're we're immersed in a social studies unit and we're studying a bunch of content in that social studies unit, and I add on a read aloud that relates to that. So they already have that background knowledge rather than having to worry about an entire set of texts. They've got some background knowledge from the work that we do in social studies, and I'm simply adding on a text and a read aloud lesson to enhance that and develop that further. The second tip I have for you is that we want to make sure that the texts we include are, I'm reading from the page, inclusive, relevant, identity affirming, and culturally responsive and sustaining. And I think this is a good time of year as we prepare for the upcoming school year to just sort of look across the text that you plan to use and just make sure you've got a wide variety of cultures represented, a wide variety of identities represented, that there's not only one single story that's being told about any given group of people. I have to say that I'm aware of a recent study by NYU that looked at some of the top core curriculum that is being purchased in a lot of states as new curriculum that actually found some of the text selections to be culturally destructive, right? Which is really problematic. And so there may be cases where you look at your new core curriculum and just look at it through the lens of, do I have a good real diversity of different kinds of stories being told, different kinds of cultures being represented, and you might say, oof, we're really missing this or that. And maybe you're going to turn to, some beloved award-winning books, like if I wanted more books that talked about social justice and the Black experience in America, I might turn to the Coretta Scott King award-winning books to try to find some additional ideas. And so in those cases, you might keep the objectives of the lesson, but you're swapping out a text, and you're going to need to plan the prompts and strategies that you're going to support them with there. Third tip is make sure it's grade level complexity. Read aloud is a structure that gives you a lot of opportunity for scaffolding. It gives you an opportunity to help kids experience text that might be out of reach for what they're reading independently, and maybe even the skills and the knowledge and the vocabulary that's a little bit out of reach for their independent work. So we don't want to waste this opportunity by reading something that they could read by themselves. We want to just ratchet it up a little bit and make sure it's at least grade level, if not higher complexity. I go into a whole thing in the book about how do we even know what grade level complexity is, and what do we know about leveling and all that. So I'll save that for another one. This Facebook Live is going to get too long if I get into all that. We're going to think about length of text as another consideration. So when we're thinking about reading aloud, as we talked about yesterday, we're going to be pausing often, right? Across I think I said yesterday, a 10-15 minute lesson, we might pause 5 times to invite kids to turn and talk or stop and jot, or we might model our thinking. So if we're going to be stopping a lot, if the text is a 300-page chapter book, it's going to take us months to get through that thing, right? That's just too long for this lesson type. I'm not saying don't use that kind of text, but for this particular lesson type, that's probably too long. So I tend to go with picture books, shorter informational text like this one. It's like a picture book length. If I do read a chapter book, and I do think it's important sometimes to read books that are longer so that kids have experience with you of what it's like to accumulate text over time and how to do that synthesis work from chapter to chapter. I'm choosing something on the shorter side, not a super long one, and probably each read aloud lesson is going to be just one chapter. There may also be times when you're just reading a chapter to them without all the stopping to try to get through more of the pages so that you can go back into a read aloud lesson type later. So think about the length. Another tip for you is really look at the text and think about how this lesson structure is asking kids to listen, and they're not seeing a lot. I mean, you can hold up, I brought another one of my favorites here, A Nation's Hope, like a book like this that has gorgeous giant illustrations by Kadir Nelson. His work is so beautiful. So these giant illustrations, you could definitely read it and hold it up, no problem. But if you have a text like, what else did I bring for you? This one, Out of the Blue, How Animals Evolved from Prehistoric Seas. As I look at this text, I realize on certain pages, no problem, but on some pages, there's quite complex like flow charts that really need to be read and considered. And so what that means is, do I want to use this as a read aloud? Maybe. If I do I have a document camera where I can slide this under and we could look at it together? Or do I maybe want to use a different lesson type? I'm going to talk to you tomorrow about close reading. That might be another choice for when there's a lot of visual content that you're going to ask kids to think about or grapple with. You certainly don't want to skip the visual content. It's there on purpose. So you want to think about whether it's possible to show it in this lesson type or whether this particular text is not a good choice for that. Next tip is engagement. We want to make sure the text is really interesting to read aloud. So I think about stories. I shared yesterday 2 truths and a lie. I mean, it's super engaging to get the kids like guessing which one is the true story, which ones are the true stories, which one's not true. I go for things that are fascinating, things that are gross, things that are unbelievable, and then just really beautifully written picture books where you just fall into the story and it invites you to really to visualize and just sort of engage with the world of the story. So of course you're thinking about what's going to engage my children in a listening kind of situation. And then the last tip I have for you is that across the year, we're aiming for variety. I already talked about variety from a kind of cultural diversity perspective, but I also want to think about a variety of genres, text types, lengths, formats, topics. We want to make sure that kids are experiencing a wide range of text types, not always picture books every day, not always nonfiction information books every day, but a variety across the year. So just to match the kinds of variety that they're going to be reading independently in their own reading. So we give them experience, again, with us, scaffolded, so that they know how to handle these different text types and they know, what kinds of strategies to employ and how to handle those different genres and formats. So I would love to hear from you now after all of that. That was just from one page of the book and it took me about 15 minutes. So if there's any comments or questions, or if you would like to share some of your favorite read-alouds and maybe share what it is about that aligns to one of these considerations for text types, or what you use this particular text for, or maybe you want to share your grade level or a particular content study that you think this text aligns to really nicely. I think it would be great to have a whole bank of titles as we head back into the school year. People watching this video after I've gone live, you can feel free to add in the comments as well. And someone from Corwin has actually offered to compile this list and share with everybody that's here live. So let me have a quick look into the chat box to see if there's any questions I can address. Let's see. Maria's asking, could you also use it to model nonfiction writing? Yeah, yesterday we talked about how wonderful it is to choose texts that can serve not only as serve to teach us reading lessons, but we can return to as writing mentors. So absolutely, when you have a really well-written text that's engaging to listen to, it's likely that you could go back and maybe slide it under a document camera or make a copy of a page and hand it out to everyone in your class and say, now let's look at this through the lens of a writer. Let's think about, how did the author make this text? What are the kinds of ways the author organized the text? What kinds of details did the author use? And try to figure out, how would I make this kind of writing myself? And those of you who know my work know, you can see it up there on the shelf somewhere over there. I have a whole book of writing strategies too. This idea that we're going to teach kids not just identify, the writer used dialogue to bring the story to life, but we're going to teach kids how to do that. What's the strategy? What are the steps that I'm going to follow to be able to do that? Teacher McManus is asking, what app do you use to find out books levels? Oh, you're gonna get me talking about levels. See, here's the thing. Levels, there's not really a scientific, perfect way to get a level for sure. This is what's tricky about leveling. And when people talk about grade level text, in the same breath they're saying we shouldn't use levels. The problem is, in order to determine grade level, we have to have some concept of levels. There's 2 big, large category of leveling schemes. One's called qualitative, with the root qual, where we're looking at qualities like the kinds of vocabulary, the levels of meaning. Then we have quantitative. Quant is like numbers, where the computer's counting things like how many words appear in a sentence, how frequent are the words, how many times are we seeing the same words show up again and again, how long is the text, how many words in a sentence, those kinds of things. So quantitative and qualitative actually sometimes give us very different reads on what level that text is. One example I give in the book is that the grapes of wrath John Steinbeck's very complex novel, is actually leveled, Lexile leveled, at the same level as Horrible Harry, which probably those of you who teach second grade know is a very simple second grade chapter book. And you look at those two and you're like, how can that be? And the answer is because quantitatively, the computer counted things like how often the words appear, how many letters are in a word, how long is each sentence, and Steinbeck writes with shorter sentences and more simplistic words. So quantitative alone, all this to say, quantitative alone can only get you in the ballpark. Qualitative alone, people might know like the Thomas and Pinnell leveling system, for example, that can only get you in the ballpark. I think you need to look at them together to give you some sense of what is grade level appropriateness, and also to know what to teach in that text. I think actually qualitative gives you more information about like, what am I pulling out of this text and highlighting for kids and giving them strategies to support. That book there, Understanding Text and Readers, can give you a lot more information about that. Yeah, small group, absolutely. Using Read Aloud to plan small groups. Yeah, so as you're listening into kids' responses to your prompts, or you're looking at their jots, that could be a great quick in-the-moment assessment to figure out what further small groups you can use. I've also used Read Aloud as a small group structure. Has anyone tried this? So not only is it always, I'm doing a read aloud to the whole class, hopefully I am doing that every day, but also sometimes I find that I take a text. One of the videos that's included in Teaching Reading Across the Day is this video of me working with a group of multilingual learners who were assigned a text to read at home as part of social studies. They read it at home. It's about different forms of government. And they read it at home, and they came in the next day and had a really hard time talking about it. So I pulled this group, it was a pretty large group, but it was maybe like a third of the class. I pulled this group and I did a read aloud lesson to walk them through and support them with it. So read aloud is something you could use as a whole class, as a small group. And of course, with any lesson, you can gather information about their skills and their proficiency level, and then use that to help you lead further small groups. Kimberly Ann's asking, which books were you referencing that talks about these strategies? So the book that is about lesson structures and lesson types and explicit engaging instruction is this new one, Teaching Reading Across the Day. So this one will teach you, how do I lead a good read aloud lesson, make good choices of books, plan it, teach responsively. There's videos of me teaching different read aloud lessons to different grade levels. That's this one. And that's only one chapter. Then I also talk about close reading and shared reading and readers theater and phonics lessons and all different kinds of reading lessons. The other strategies, Reading Strategies book 2.0, I talked about yesterday. That one has reading strategies. Writing Strategies book has writing strategies. Understanding Text and Readers, the orange one. That one has suggestions for text leveling. All right, we're definitely at time. I swore to myself, I was like, it's gonna be 10 minutes today, and here we are, 18 minutes. Anyway, I love hanging out with you all. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your engagement. And I will see you tomorrow for the third and final day of our 3-day session on read alouds. Bye, everybody.